a little bit ago, but wanted to hop in for the session.
And I will share my screen. Beams. All right, cool. So we're going to be talking about uh, making cold outreach cool again. So um, we'll go through a brief agenda. So I want to introduce myself so that uh, y'all know who you're talking with. We'll talk about some learning goals. Um, and then I kind of broke this down into three parts in my mind. So one, focus on um, how to reach out to your first connections, the people that you know or that you're in close community with. Second, how to leverage that network and um, get introduced to people that they know that you may not know, and grow your network that way. And then the third piece, because I know that there are a number of 24 fellows, and we've been doing this whole mentorship match thing. And I think this is a valuable skill in general. We're going to talk about how to make the most of a mentorship relationship, um, which is a lot of the things that we'll learn in part one and two, but it has some more specific uh, things as well, I believe. All right, so who am I? So I'm a 2018 Birmingham fellow. Um, I went to UVA and then moved down to Birmingham to work at a B2B SaaS company called Fleetio with a number of other fellows. I quickly moved to the product management team, so I definitely identify as a product person. Um, and then eventually left that company to start my own software company, went through the VFA Accelerator. Um, and now I'm living in Baltimore and working on the intersection of tech and agriculture. And I'll note here that I think that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, I learned in my founder experience, especially the persistence piece, um, and like going into a new industry and literally knowing nobody and having to figure out, how do I meet people, especially in a remote world. And so I think this is both super valuable just for finding a job and like being successful in your own job, but it's also, down the line for folks who are interested, a critical founder skill in my opinion. So some of the things that I really hope that everyone comes away with uh, after engaging in this session is just one, like feeling confident reaching out to the people that you're in community with. So feeling confident reaching out to the VFA network, to people that maybe you went to school with but you weren't super close with. Um, those larger communities. Um, Similarly, gaining confidence for asking those people for introductions. Seeing that they know somebody else and really having the confidence uh, and knowing how to ask them appropriately, if they'd be willing to connect you to. Um, Something else that I think is more subjective, but I at least want us to gain awareness about is just some best practices for responsiveness style, like how to structure a call when you finally do get connected to somebody, and then also following up. Um, and then as we just talked about, how do I take advantage of a mentor? And also like how do I stay persistent when I email somebody and they ghost me completely. And we're going to talk a little bit about tricks for that. So a quick disclaimer, a lot of this is my opinion. What's appropriate depends based on the context. Um, and what I tend to do may not be right in every context, but it generally works for me. So I'm excited to share it with you all. And I would say like if you have a different perspective or you've heard the opposite advice, please share. Uh, we're not a huge group and we're all in community with each other. So I won't be offended if somebody raises their hand and says, "Hey, I heard the exact opposite thing. What are you talking about?" Um, and so I definitely encourage people to use the Zoom raise hand function, just so that I can make sure that I see that you have a thought. But I'm really hoping that this will be a engaging session, that it's not just going to be me talking the entire time. So just wanted to mention this disclaimer. So let's jump into part one, reaching out to first connections. One of the things that I really want to drive home here is that you can rely on your community, right? Your first connections might be like people you've just like you've actually met, friends of a friend of a friend that you met at a party once. It might be somebody who was in your program at university, or somebody who just went to your school in general, who might be a part of that alumni network. It might be somebody you went up with, or the parent of somebody that you grew up with. Um, and it could be somebody in the VFA network, even if you've never met them. Um, and these are people that you can rely on, right? Uh, they they want to help you, and that's going to be a reframing we'll talk about. Um, we'll talk about a little bit later. Um, so these are your first connections, and then and I'll refer to these throughout this chat as like firsts, or like some other words that deal with first. And then your second connections are people that they know. So, it's like their first connections that aren't also your first connections. So pretty straightforward, but just to define some language. One of the things that I think is the most important thing to do when you are thinking about asking, or thinking about reaching out to somebody, is asking yourself these questions. And I'm sure that there are some other ones. So what do I want to learn from them? Like what is my goal? What am I trying to figure out for myself? Right? What do I want to reflect on? And how will this conversation help me with that reflection process? And then the third one I think is, why do I think they're cool? Like, what is it about what this person does for work, the way that this person walks through the world, um, the communities that this person has been able to build, et cetera, that make me excited to talk with them. And sometimes that's enough of a reason to reach out to somebody saying, hey, I think what you're building is super cool, and I just want to learn more about what you're working on and how you got into that. Um, and people will eat that up. So, um, one, I think these questions make outreach easier, because they can help you actually then craft an outreach email, which we'll talk about. Um, and they also make you more likely to be successful because we're talking about articulating your own personal goals. I would recommend like writing these down, um, so that when they say, "Hey, why did you reach out?" Um, you have something that you can articulate around either what you're trying to learn, what you're trying to figure out for yourself, uh, why what they're working on makes you excited. Um, and so I think it feeds into everything else. And this is a really important starting point. So I mentioned this before, um, but one of the most common things that I've heard as I've been connecting with 2024 fellows, and as I talk to, I think, folks, especially who are younger in their career, but also people who are, a few years in, or older alumni as well, is this thought of like bothering people, right? It's like, oh, I thought about reaching out. I didn't want to bother anybody. Um, the I think an important mental reframing for all of this is that you're never bothering people by asking them for support. You're giving them an opportunity to do something good and feel good about themselves. And the worst comes to worst is they say no, right? But they say, hey, look, like I just had a kid, and we bought a house, and like life is crazy, and we're going travel for 2 months, and you know, uh, this winter, like I really just uh, can't handle the logistics right now. That's totally cool. Um, but they're not going to be mad at you for thinking that they're awesome, that they are experienced enough that they could possibly teach you something, right? So this is just a mental reframing that we're going to touch on over and over again, but I think it's really important to build this mindset. Quick speed check. How's the pace of this information? Or just like thumbs up, thumbs down, go faster, go slower, just right. Cool. Um, so let's do a quick interactive slide. So take a second to read these emails, and then I'm going to ask which is better and why. What specific pieces um, feel strong or could be stronger, and encourage you to raise your hand, and I'll call on you. And if nobody raises their hand, then I'm just going to call on people blind. So, um, or forewarning. All right, Abar, kick us off. Thank you. Abar, do you want to come off mute and
Yes, can
answer
you
the
hear me?
question?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Huh?
Under the sun. Can you hear me? From the sawgrass to the
Yeah,
seagrass. Yes.
it's
Take
a,
an
yeah.
airboat
Go ahead.
ride at Everglades Holiday. Sorry, yeah, I know my mic is a little bit weird, but yeah, I think definitely number one would be better because he's talking specifically about what he's interested in for his next career pivot. He's providing his availability off the bat. He also mentions a specific amount of time, so he's very specific with what he wants, his future goals, and being really available to the other person.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abar. Yeah, Bar hit on a lot of it, right? Being really clear about like why is this person reaching out? Um, Sharing a calendar invite link so that it makes it really easy to schedule. Being really clear that like this is a 30-minute ask. This isn't an hour ask or 2 hour ask. It is really quick. What else? Anybody have the differing opinions or want to add to what Abar said?
It emphasizes like the mutual people that link you together. So there's more sense of interpersonal belonging.
Totally. Yeah, providing context for like how do we know each other? Um, and like how did I randomly find you in the world?
Yeah, I was gonna say I also appreciate that in the first one you link to their calendar and you make it easy for them rather than in the second it's like, hey, I'm free pretty much whenever, right? It's like the classic, where do you want to go for dinner with your partner, right? It's like giving some options or giving like an action item is much better than like a vague do whatever. I will say when I was looking at these earlier, I I find myself more naturally writing email number one, and like adding a lot of context to it. And then now, like, I'm trying to get to email number two of like simplifying, making it easier to digest, because I imagine people are just busy. And so I waffle on this of like how much detail do I add because there's often so many connections and so many overlaps. Um, any thoughts on like how you keep it like crisp?
Yeah, that's such a great point, right? Like this isn't, as we talked about before, this is subjective, right? And it's contextual. Um, and there's a balance to strike between having way too much context and like uh overwhelming the person versus having what being very vague or too open and then that putting the burden on the person. Um, I'm curious about others' thoughts, honestly, about like how you think about striking the balance. I will say for myself, I like to include like who am I if I don't know them, like why I want to talk. Um, Basically like asking them to talk and then adding a calendar link and saying, and now you try to include the sign like, I know you're super busy, so like basically give them an opt out. if they don't have the bandwidth. And so my personal thing is like, is this, 3 short paragraphs? And then once it gets longer, then I might try to pare back. And then Lewis, it's your hand raised. I want to touch on something else on Anand said about the vagueness, and this is this like the piece about like if you're too busy or I'm free whenever. That's another common thing that I hear from people where they're like, oh, I have a pretty open schedule. The mindset is I want to put like I want to be somewhat differential, right? I want to give this person as open of a calendar as they want so they can choose the time that's most convenient for them. In my experience, what that actually does is it makes the other person go to their calendar and figure out what times they're free and then send an email back suggesting times, or maybe they send their own calendar link. But either way, like it ends up actually putting more work on their plate rather than keeping them open. And so that's why I generally try to like send a calendar link, or sometimes I'll suggest like 1 or 2 times. And then it's a lot easier for them to say, oh, I actually am free here, or I'm not free at all. And we can go from there. So Lewis, I saw you raise your hand. If you want to.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a good conversation. I think in general, email one is obviously the better choice, but to Anand's like point, everyone's busy and being concise. Is there a way to basically take email one but shorten it, right? Make it more concise. That would probably be the ultimate. I personally actually don't worry about the opt-outs. So I've just scratched the whole thing about if you're busy on all of them. Saying, ignoring or saying no is easy. I kind of just assume that it's an opportunity to meet. So that's one way that I would shorten it. I love having the calendar link. I completely agree that if you're trying to set an appointment, it's much better to be specific and then they can work around that. So I run a compost service, and when we have new customers sign up and I'm scheduling onboarding, I just say, thanks for signing up. Are you going to be home at 5:30 p.m.? And then they say, no, can we do 6 p.m.? Right? Exact day, exact time. Of course, I do have flexibility and I could give a bunch of options, but I think by giving a very specific time and day, it orients them around that. And then they can reply, 30 minutes earlier, an hour later or something. That works really well. Yeah. I also just think this is just a broad like thought, but the people that are highest up and have the most power in conversations will probably say the least. So I think the more that is written, it shows like a differential to that person, which maybe you do feel that way or whatever, but just know that it comes off as like you want something from them. And I'm saying all this stuff because they have something I want versus maybe we're equals, or there could be an interesting collaboration here. So less kind of shows a more of an equal power dynamic.
Yeah, those are all such great points. The opt-out might be optional. The power of anchoring somebody's mind around a certain time really helps them filter in their own head around what other times to add in. And then an awesome point about the different power dynamics that might be at play, and also again that all of this is contextual, and that there's no like one right answer. Thanks for all of that, Lewis. Curtis.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, Ben. And I obviously think number one is better, but the way I approach cold outreach is slightly different, but I mean it's all subjective, and like I don't even know if my method is the best, but I actually don't put a Calendly link, mostly because I don't know if some people feel this way, but it feels a little like straightforward and kind of artificial. Like if I'm reaching out to another fellow who is like my age or something like that, and I give them a Calendly link, it just like right off the bat, I feel like it seems a little too professional, and it's like not needed. And like if they're open to a call, like you can always follow up with the Calendly link if needed. But then if it's like on the first message you follow up with the Calendly link, it seems a little straightforward. So then that's why I would generally at times start with something like number two and then follow up with a Calendly link to kind of set something up down the line. And then also one thing I've started doing is I'd ask for a call, but then also give the option to have them answer questions async. So I'll be like, oh yeah, let me know if you're open to a call or answering some questions async. So then they have the option of not hopping a call and they can like just type a response to a question, and then like you still are able to build your network that way and get some questions answered.
Yeah, that last point I want to pull out, especially that's such a great point. That's something that I rarely do, to be honest, but I think it's such a good practice just to offer that other option, because some people do prefer to answer questions asynchronously, and it does give that those options. So I love that. Um, to the point about not sharing a Calendly link, I think that's another great example of like how this is all context dependent. I'm definitely somebody like I send Calendly links to my family. If like my cousin wants to catch up, I'll send him a calendar link. So that's like the end of the spectrum that I'm coming from. Um, and I think it also depends a lot on how you're reaching out, right? If you're doing an email versus you're like texting somebody or slacking somebody, like it there might be more back and forths before you send a calendar link, and the more I'll say like personal types of outreach channels. Curtis, awesome. Thank you for that, for all of that wisdom. Matt, and then I think we'll move on after Matt.
Yeah, I'm curious of other people's experiences with this, but I've found that sometimes it can be useful to have your ask kind of be the start of the email or very close to the start of the email. That allows the person to kind of get in the framework of, oh, I know what I'm reading for, and then I can get the more context of how I might know this person or what our connection is or the specifics of it. That way they don't have to read, like, this is only a sentence, but sometimes we'll have a really long context paragraph. And if I'm someone who has, I'm short on time, I'm not going to read that. And if I know all you want is a 5 minute call, I might see that and then take the time to read who you are and why I might actually want this call. So just another option for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Don't bury the lead, and put the ask right up front. I might have to try that. Something I'm reflecting on also is maybe a cool follow up of this conversation might be like people putting their own examples into a big folder or something. It'd be really fun to see the diversity of of outreach emails and how people think about it. So we talked a lot about these when maybe like the main thing that I circle around when I'm sending an email like this is how do I make it as easy as possible for the person to say yes. So some of the things that we talked about, right? Why do you want to connect? Make it easy for them to grab some time in your calendar or share a time that works for them. Lewis's example of, hey, are you free at 5 p.m. on Thursday? Opt out. Right. We heard some differing opinions on this. So again, all of this is subjective. And then a reminder about just how you know each other if it's relevant. Which, as Sally mentioned, helps provide some context for like where in my life does this person fit. Something that I wanted to touch on here is that like oftentimes I'll see people ask for 45 minutes or for an hour. I personally think that most conversations, especially for like brief intro calls or asking a few questions, can be 30 minutes. And I know for myself, it's a lot easier to say yes to a 30-minute call than it is for an hour call. Like I have to think a lot about that a lot more. Um, and so that's like personal opinion, that I think that everyone can save time by having shorter calls. Um, and then, just as asking ourselves about kind of our goals for the conversation helped us write that outreach email. A good connection email helps you come prepared to a call. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Before we talk about that, let's talk about persistence. I made this mistake so many times before. I just like bit the bullet and stopped being shameful about it. But I will double, triple, quadruple, really generally up to like 5 times, um, reach out to somebody on a weekly or every 2 weeks basis until I get a response from them that either says, "Oh yes, I'd love to talk. Sorry, I just had a really busy couple of months," or they say, "Hey, like I just can't talk, and appreciate you stop reaching out." Um, I, as I mentioned, the rule of thumb that I use is reaching out every 1 to 2 weeks until I've sent 4 messages without a response. Um, and then I'll send a final message in a different email thread that says something like, subject line, uh, last time reaching out, and has some language that says like, "Hey, so and so, I hope everything's okay with you. When I sent a couple of emails and haven't heard back from you, so I'll stop reaching out. But if you do want to connect, here's my calendar link, and would still love to pull up the chat." Um, Gmail snooze feature is like my uh, what's the word, like the thing that really helps me for this, where I'll send an email and then I'll snooze it for a week or for 2 weeks, and that way it goes back into my inbox, because otherwise I would just totally forget that I emailed that person in the first place. And so I really recommend using that feature. um, I think this kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Keep the tone friendly and appreciative. Um, I think that assuming best intentions is really important in general. But if somebody's not responding, it's not because they don't like you, or you did something wrong. I think generally it's because they have something going on in their own life, or they're not good at managing their inbox, um, and they want to help, but maybe they literally just haven't had the bandwidth to respond to your email. So keep the tone friendly and appreciative as you go at it. And I also, the last thing I'll say on this is like, I think people respect persistence. If you keep reaching out over and over again, it's like, okay, this person really wants to talk. I should, 30 minutes is it's worthwhile to hear them out. And here's just one example of me literally every week for a month and a half, I reached out to this person, with things like, you know, "Hey, just want to follow my last email. Any interest in chatting? Hey, hope you're reaching well. Wondered about this on top of your inbox." Um, and it took me like a month and a half to get in touch with this person, and then we had a great conversation. Um, so um, you know that puts it into perspective. I actually do this shamelessly. Um, so right now we've thought about what our goals are for why we're talking to somebody. We've sent an email. They've responded. We've gotten some time on the calendar. Um, the next step in my mind is prepping. Um, I would say something that's good to do, but not absolutely necessary, is sending an email the day before, reiterating why you're excited to chat, um, what your goals for the conversation are, and also confirming the time still works. Um, a lot of times, like people aren't that great with their calendars, and um, so things come up, and then they're a no-show, and it's no fun for anybody. So I honestly rarely send an email the day before, but I wish I did more often. So that's why I included it in here. Something that I do regular regularly, I do regularly, um, that I think is good to do, but you can't always be 100%, is take 15 minutes the day of the call and remind yourself who you're talking with, what your goals are. Make sure that you write down questions that you're curious about. Um, I personally like to block out 15 minutes before a call to do this, since it also helps me make sure that I'm on time for the call. Um, and it's like really nice to get that context beforehand. One of the things about a good outreach email is that it really helps with this step. Because if you can go back to your email now, let's say they booked a call a month from when you two connected, and you're like, wait, who's Ben Weinberg? Like, why did I want to talk to him again? You can go and see, oh right, I really wanted to learn this, and uh, we know each other through VFA, and it like helps get you back into the context of the conversation. Um, and so again, like all these things kind of add into each other to help out with your own personal process. Also, I'm realizing that I haven't looked at the chat at all, so I'm going to do um, a quick scan of this.
So we can also cover like chat questions at the end too, because I think you're also kind of like answering some of them as we go on.
Okay, sounds good. That's a great point on. Sally, I would say the final message is the 5th. So I'll do 4, and then I'll do that 5th in like a separate thread. Okay, cool. Anna, do we also just, if there's anything that's like a quick question like Sally's, can you be looking at the chat and
I'll let
just
you know.
interrupt me? Thank you. Okay, so now we've prepped for the call, and we're in it. We're in Zoom or on the phone. Some things to set the tone right for when you're actually having the conversation. Be on time. Enough said. I think thanking somebody for taking the time to chat, like expressing gratitude is important to me. And I think people, like it's a good gratitude practice, right? Somebody's taking time out of their day to help you. So I think that's important. Giving a reminder about what you hope to talk about, right? Like you just prepped and yourself. So also assuming that like that person has their own busy life and they're trying to remind themselves like, who is this person? How do we know each other? What do they want to talk about? And so like reminding them what you just reminded yourself, 15 minutes before the call, is I think a good way to like get them into the same mindset, so they're not spending the first 5 minutes of the call trying to figure out who you are. I mentioned before, like writing down questions, right? Of like, what do I want to learn from this person? Something that I think is a skill that's built with time is trying to not make a conversation like this feel like an interview. So if you write down questions, that's really important. But I think also like let tangents happen, see where it goes, be curious. If you have questions written down, I know I'm often surprised how often I get to most of what's on my list organically, and those questions become kind of like transitions in the conversation. So I'm not saying, hey, actually, I want to get to this question, but it's more so, we're talking about something, we go on a tangent. I see a connection to another question I have, and so I ask it, and it becomes more fluid, and it just, it feels like a great conversation. So keep to the time you set. So I think again, this is contextual. Like if it's a really great conversation and it feels right, you can ask if it's okay to have 5 or 10 more minutes to keep talking, and they might say yes and they might say no. But generally, 1 to 2 minutes before we're supposed to end, I'll say something like, "Hey, I really want to be mindful and respectful of your time. Either like it was great chatting, thank you so much for taking the time. I'd love to stay in touch," or I'll say, "Hey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. you have another 5 minutes? Like I'm really enjoying what we're talking about right now. And they, again, they might say yes or no. Take notes. I think this is a big one. Uh, this is one of those things that then helps with follow up, in my opinion. And personally, like I know my memory's terrible. So if I don't take notes, I'm gonna totally forget about what we talked about. Um, if you have your own style, do what's best for you. Um, if you have a perfect memory, that's awesome. I'm jealous. Um, if you have trouble taking notes while you're having a conversation, um, like verbatim, maybe it's something like right after the call, you have 15 minutes blocked out to kind of write down some of your key takeaways. But in general, I think like having something on paper that you can then refer back to is really important. Um, and then um, the last one that I'm pretty sure I learned from an older alumni in the VFA community is ask this question, um, especially if you're on a journey where you're trying to talk to a bunch of people who are kind of like in the same industry, um, to say like, hey, is there anyone else that you know who you think would be valuable for me to chat with? And they might say, oh yeah, so and so is doing great work, and this person too. And then you can say, would you be willing to connect us? Um, and maybe they say, yes, of course. Maybe they say, I actually don't know them so well, but like you can just reach out on LinkedIn and say that we talked. Or they might say, you know, uh, no, I think that you should do more XYZ and then ask me again. But that's a really great way. It's like, this spring I was on the job search and I wanted to work in the agriculture industry, and I like knew a few people who worked in the industry, but I've no background in this. And so I asked this question so many times, and it was really helpful in building an initial network. And so that's a piece of advice that I think is important. And then finally, after you've had the conversation, follow up. So send a thank you email. Um, this is again, like if you took notes, thank you email should be pretty easy. Um, again, this is contextual, like Matt or Curtis, I think one of you mentioned, you know, there might be a power dynamic, right? If you're like working on collaborating with somebody, or there's more of like an equal relationship, you might not send a thank you email, and it might not be appropriate. But I'd say in general, if you're, you know, like trying to find a job, or you're trying to like learn a specific skill, sending a thank you email can be really powerful. And again, it then reminds you, like it serves as another artifact, or when you go back to say, oh hey, I want to reach back out to Ben. What did we talk about last time? You can go to your thank you email and say, oh right, here were my main takeaways. And like here are the action items that I said that I would do. That then keeps you accountable. I think it's good to build a reputation for being somebody who follows through rather than the other way around. Um, this one about setting a reminder and making a list for follow up, uh, I think is specific if you're like on a certain journey. So again, using my example of when I was on the job search, I talked to 50 plus people who were doing something in agriculture that I thought was cool. And I kept a list of every single one of those people so that when I got a job, I was able to follow back up with every single one of those people saying, hey, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time a couple months ago just to catch you up. I just started working at this company. I'm really excited about it. Would love to catch up. And so it goes back into that, uh, the potential for another touch point to really build that relationship. And then connect via LinkedIn. Um, I'm not going to go too deep into this because Amanda Tian gave a great presentation about like building your LinkedIn and stuff that is in the VFA Notion. But one thing that I'll say here is like, I think that if you're not already connected with somebody, connect after you chat, and that's a great way to like build up uh, your LinkedIn connections. That then we'll talk about why like that actually matters, because it's really helpful for this next step that we'll talk about in part 2. So this is just an example of a thank you email that I sent, just to provide some examples. And this is actually a call where somebody was like, had reached out to them and they were like, hey, I'm happy to take the call, but also like I think that you should be more prepared before you reach out to another person. And it was like great candid feedback, and I also wanted to express appreciation for that feedback. All right, let's take a deep breath. I feel like I just talked for a while. Any thoughts before we jump into the part 2? Otherwise, I'll keep rolling.
I think the only question I kind of have is like when you don't have a like what if you don't know the question that you're trying to ask, right? It's like you reached out to a bunch of ag tech folks who you just thought were doing cool things, but also like you don't know what they're doing entirely, right? They in their 23 and a half hours of their day. Like how do you frame the conversation so it's like, hey, I value like the open-endedness and like what happens, like I just don't know what to even engage with you on besides the fact that, hey, I think what you're doing is really cool, right? How do you
Yeah,
kind of approach those conversations, or what do you do to kind of containerize those?
that's a great question, Ivan. I like literally before this presentation was looking through my email and I saw emails and I was like, oh, this is kind of a good example of of an intro email. And I think this is exactly what you're getting at. And so when I was on the beginning of, I'll say like one, start with reaching out to people who like are friendly, right? Like somebody who you have a real relationship with or you've talked with before, or is like like a cousin or like a friend of a close friend, right? Um, and I think it's okay to say like, hey, like I don't really know what I'm looking for, but like maybe here's my North Star. Like I want to work for a company that's helping increase soil health at scale. Um, or you might say like, I'm starting to think about my next career steps. I know I want to do something related to agriculture, but like I'm really having trouble narrowing in on what I'm excited about. Um, I think that's a valid question. And if you're being like honest with yourself and with this person about like, you're trying to figure it out, and then they're also like, you're not reaching out to like the CEO of the biggest agriculture company to help you think through this. Um, you're really leveraging like a personal connection. Those are two ways that I would think um, are good to start with. Great question. Any any other questions on part 2 or thoughts on this question? All right, so let's jump back into this. So part 2, now that we have built a robust network of first connections, how do we get in touch with the people that they know? So at the end, right, we talked about connecting with people on LinkedIn. Um, Personally, like LinkedIn is what I use the most to find mutual connections. A few things here that Amanda went way more in depth to. Again, raising up the VFA Notion, where a lot of this content is held. I generally use a rule to only connect with people that I actually know, or that I've talked with, or that I like know from like, school, even if like we weren't close friends. Um, because what happens is that if I'm looking for, like, again, I'll use my example, like somebody who works in ag tech, and it says, oh, you guys are second connections. Let's see what your mutuals are. And it's 3 people that I I've never actually met. I just like randomly connected with. Then it's kind of like I hit a dead end. There's not really anything I can do there. Um, and so it like muddies the water a little bit, in my opinion. Um, so I'll leave it at there. We can get deeper into like use of LinkedIn uh, later. Um, but just wanted to, that's like one thing that I think is important there. And then once you find a mutual connection um, via LinkedIn or other research channels, try to make the ask to the person that you do already know via the most personal channel available. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Um, I had a great conversation with the 2024 fellow a few days ago, um, where they were like, is there a VFA database for all the alums and the industries that they work with and the roles that they have? That's like not LinkedIn, that's something that's a little bit easier to search and more accessible. And I was like, no, that's a great idea. We should definitely build that. But also that's kind of the like you can get a lot of the same values that something like that would provide just organically via the community platforms that we already have. So this is a great reason to be in the VFA Slack and whatever comes after it. It's a great reason to be in the VFA alumni group on LinkedIn, which Anna can share a link to that if folks aren't in that already. Thanks, Alan. I'm putting you on the spot there. And like the most important thing to that, I think, is leveraging public channels. So if, now we're all friends after this, you all know me, I know you. And so Matt, if you reach out to me and say, hey Ben, I really appreciated the talk. I saw that you're connected to so and so, or you asked me, do you know anybody who works in marketing and pet care? In that works that's in the VFA network. I might be super busy that week and not checking the VFA Slack. I might not know anybody and say, hey, sorry, I can't help you. But I'm so happy you're excited about marketing and pet care. Or I might know somebody. So that's what happens when you reach out in a private channel. If you reach out in a public channel, so let's say you post in Fellow General, and Matt asks the same question and says, hey, everybody, I'm really excited about getting into, finding my first job through this network. Does anybody know anybody who does marketing and pet care? Then all of a sudden, there's so many more people who might be available and have the knowledge to answer that question. And so it's kind of like a crowdsourcing thing, right? The more public of a channel that you post something in, and also the more context that you provide, and there's a balance there, as we talked before, it makes it more likely for people to actually be able to help you. So whether it's in Slack or the alumni group on LinkedIn, I really recommend posting in a public channel because it just helps people help you. So I said I would talk about the types of outreach channels. Generally, I like to think of outreach in this order, from the most personal and the most likely to respond to the least personal and the least likely to respond. So, text is super personal. If you have somebody's phone number, it might be appropriate to text them. Slack, also super personal. People don't check Slack as often, so like there's that component there. Email, it's still pretty personal, but you might be less likely to get a response, or less likely that somebody reads your email rather than your text. And then LinkedIn, super not personal. I generally think that like LinkedIn is not a great place if you want a response, as a personal opinion. Generally, my rule of thumb is I try to do all connections in email, because it's just easier to follow up and keeps all the communication in one place. Um, Even if I have a person's phone number, I'll only text if it's like a really good friend, or if I don't have their email and so I have to text them. Um, and I'll really only do a first outreach on LinkedIn if I don't know the person well, or I just don't have their phone or email. Um, and so that's kind of how I think about it. I think also, like, I don't know about y'all, I can't mark something as unread in my text inbox. And so it's really hard for me to like keep up to date on an inbox and um, in text. And so that's all to say. I try to keep everything in email, um, which we just talked about. Um, I will say, like, even if you text somebody and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'll connect you to so and so," like, try to move that communication to email once you get connected. Again, I think it's just easier to manage an inbox and set reminders. And if you get connected on a platform that, especially email, that's like more personal, don't move it to LinkedIn. Um, this was I connected a 2024 fellow with, and this happened a number of times. It's why I'm including this example, where I connected them to somebody. I think this was for the mentorship match, and they said, they had a great response. I'm so excited to connect with you, to get to know you better, and learn about your professional experience. And then they said they were going to reach out on LinkedIn to set up a time that works. And honestly, that just confused me. I was like, why would you move to LinkedIn when you literally have their email? And like, this isn't the only person who did this. And I blocked out their name for privacy. Um, so so that we can learn from others' mistakes. Um, and again, we talked about this in part one, but make it easy for people to help you. Make sure you have a clear ask for, why do I want to talk to this person who you know? Provide context for the journey that you're on. I'm looking for a job. I'm trying to, get into product management. Um, Give an opt out, right? Again, like, that could be like, give an opt out, don't give an opt out. Like, I generally lean towards an opt out, but there are different opinions on that. Hey, if you don't know this person super well, no worries. I just saw that you two were connected. And then offer to send an easily forwardable email. What is an easily forwardable email? They help facilitate introductions. So we'll look at an example in a second. I'm also aware that we have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna try to go through these fairly quickly. But it makes it easy as possible for the person that you know to make the connection. An easily forwardable email contains all the context in one place, right? It's like, it contains all these things that you've already thought about. What are my goals? What journey am I on? Right, making the ask. It's written to the person that you know, which can feel kind of weird. It's like, if Matt's asking me for a connection to Anand, then and Matt wanted to send, I said, yeah, I'd love to connect you. Can you send me a forwardable email so that I can check in with Anand and make sure he has the bandwidth? Matt would actually write the email to me to make the connection, not to Anand. And we'll look at an example in a second. And then also it gives an opt out to the person they're connecting you to. And in general, I assume that if I'm asking somebody for a connection, they're going to ask that other person if it's okay for them to connect them with me before making the introduction. So I always assume that both people have opted in. So here's an example. So in this case, I emailed this person after we had a conversation, and this is my follow-up email to the call. And I said, hey, thanks for connecting me, offering to connect with your friend who's in the ag tech world. I'm going to send an email in a separate thread to make it easier to forward. And then I sent the same person this email that, right, was like kind of redundant for this email. But this one wouldn't have been as easy for them to forward to their friend. This one provided a lot more context of, what my background is in, like what journey I'm on, right? And so there's a lot of context in the second email that's not in the first email. And because I think as I was putting this together, I was like, this is kind of hard to follow. I put together this like timeline diagram. So let's say that my first connection's name is Izzy, and the second connection's name is Fernando. So I want Izzy to connect me to Fernando. So I would ask Izzy at first for a connection and send an easily forwardable email. Izzy's going to forward that email to Fernando and say, hey, Fernando, see below. I just talked with Ben. He seems like a great guy. I'd love to put you two in touch if you're open. Fernando would say back to Izzy, yeah, for sure. Please connect us. About the chat, or say, hey, no, actually, I don't have the group right now. Then Izzy would forward that email back to me and say, Ben, Fernando, connecting you to Fernando's CC'd. I'll let you take it from here. And then now, like, I have the whole thread, right? And I can respond in 24 hours saying, thanks, Izzy, so much for connecting us, moving you to BCC, and then send Fernando my calendar link. I hope that wasn't too much. I have about 10 more slides, and it's 6 o'clock. It's 6 in the morning my time, which means it's noon other people's time, likely. So I'm gonna give everyone the permission to leave as your schedule requires. Because we're recording this, I'm gonna just keep going so that if you want, you can watch the last 10 minutes on your own, or like folks who want to watch it can watch in the future. So I'm just going to keep going. But also, anyone have any questions on this in that spirit of not rushing? Okay, keep going. So, and then once you get connected to that second connection, the same rules apply. So as we discussed in part one, make it easy, be persistent, come prepared, follow up, and really like be responsive to that connection within 24 hours if possible. And then I'd say lastly, follow up with the person who made the introduction after you talk, just to close the loop. So here's the example of I talked to Fernando and I sent an email back to the person who connected us, just saying, hey, Fernando and I had a great conversation. Thank you so much for connecting us. And again, it's like not like required. I don't think people are gonna like dock you points in life for not doing this, but I think it's a nice touch, personally. So just a quick note on the double opt-in connection. I mentioned this before, but assume that the first person will check in with the second before connecting us. And also that means that if somebody asks you to connect them to somebody else, I would generally recommend checking in with that person before you make the connection. I think it's best practice for the reasons that it makes sure that the person you're connected to like has some context, they're not taken off guard. I think it's respectful of people's time and bandwidth. It's easier, if Jess is asking if she can connect me to Logan, it's easier for me to say no to Jess, right? Than her assuming that I want to talk with Logan, and then me having to say, hey, thank you so much for connecting us, but actually I really don't have the bandwidth right now. Wish you the best of luck. Right. So it's like that's just kind of awkward, in my opinion. But this is all my perspective, right? Others have different opinions on making the assumption that somebody's, too busy to connect with somebody. And so I've heard this both ways, but I really do believe in the double opt-in personally. All right, so now we're gonna very quickly talk about making the most of a mentor relationship. What's great is that all of this is additive. So just as we saw that part one, and really like so many of those lessons are also valuable for part two. All of these are so, will set you up better to have a strong mentorship relationship. one thing that I think is important, and this might be like more for the 2024 and 2023 fellows that have been connected with a mentor through our alum match program. Um, but like creating structure, in my opinion, really helps you make the most of this opportunity. To me, mentorship relationships are cool because the person that you're talking with is building some more context about your strengths and your weaknesses and your interests. And they can help reflect that back to you so that you have a better sense of self, a better sense of those things for yourself. Um, and that's somewhat different than like when you're just talking to somebody in a one-off conversation. Um, let's talk about like who's responsible for what. Um, it's a relationship, right? It's two-way street, and both parties are responsible for different things. In my mind, the mentor has a responsibility to be responsive and present, right? So if you're asking for a time on their calendar and they've committed to this mentorship relationship, I really believe that they have the responsibility to respond to that. And then when you have a call, to like be focused on you, not focus on other things. Um, that said, the onus is on you as the mentee to set the direction of the conversation. Um, Mainly setting an agenda and like being prepared for what you want to talk to. Um, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Some quick tips on this: follow the same rules and perseverance, showing up prepared, taking notes, following up that we've discussed. Uh, Especially the perseverance piece. People that you know might ghost you in the same way that people that you don't know might ghost you. Um, and it's not because they don't like you or you did something wrong. It's because they're busy and they're not good at managing their inboxes. So follow up uh, and no one's gonna dock you for it. Agree on a regular frequency and duration together. So depending on your personalities and schedules, it might make sense to do 30 minutes once a month, or maybe they prefer to do 30 minutes twice a month, right? Like, but either way, I think that you two have to agree on it together, because it's a two-way relationship. And then on setting an agenda, I think it's really important to set, or on setting a direction, it's really important to set an agenda and try to send it out 24 hours beforehand if you can, so that they have some time to like look at it and mull it over. But also it's better late than never. If you send out an agenda 5 minutes before the call, I've done that. It is what it is. A quick note just on like language. I think personally there are different types of mentors. You have like these general mentors that are long term and they're getting to know you over time. You might talk to them really frequently in one period and then have less frequent meetings over a different period, and it might wax and wane over time. Uh, there are what I call like journey mentors. So these are people who help you out during a specific period in your life. And during that period, it's a more frequent connection, but it's also shorter term. So this might be if you're looking for a job, or you're like having a difficult interpersonal situation at work, and you really want somebody to help talk you through that. And then the third is what I would call skill mentor. So somebody who, you're saying, I want to learn how uh, to set up a project for Gantt chart for like project management, and that person might help you on this like specific challenge or provide new context there. But often like maybe they're only meeting with you once or like 2 or 3 times to like help you learn the skill. And it's a different type of relationship. So for the mentor match, I really think of these people as journey mentors. They're meant to support you in finding a job. Once you found a job, it's okay to end the relationship and say, thank you so much for supporting me on this journey. And I'm really looking forward to staying in touch in other ways. That should be a conversation that you two have together. That said, if you want to keep it going, I think it's important to have an explicit conversation about that so that each of you can take a look at your bandwidth and say, and have the opportunity to opt out. And that bandwidth is going to change over time. So the mentor for one life journey might not be the right person for you for everything. So keep those in mind. All right. Yeah, Logan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. So in terms of the mentorship, I just had a personal question that might be might be useful for other people too. So I went to
Yeah.
like an investor feedback session where you can like talk about like a business idea, um, and like kind of go over your pitch deck and everything. And afterwards, there was like the organizer set up an email chain, and where of course you did the thank you email afterwards. But the investors were saying like, oh, if you ever need any help or if there's anything I can do, feel free to email or chat with me. Now, does that really like, I know people like say that to be nice, but like, I guess like in terms of, it's not necessarily mentorship, but like if I wanted to follow up with like if I wanted to chat with them, like where is it overstepping the boundaries or like of like, oh, you're asking too much versus like um starting a relationship, I guess is what I'm asking. Like is it what's a good way of starting that relationship with that person after like a real life meeting, especially if they're in this case an investor or potential investor?
Yeah. I think that like that mentorship relationships are like kind of like dating in a weird way, where you wouldn't like just email somebody and ask them to be your life partner or your partner in general. And so like there is somewhat of like tact to like maybe the first thing you do is reach out. Like one, if they say, please reach out, I'd love to be helpful, they mean it, right? They do want you to reach out. Because again, like it feels good to them, right? They get to help a budding entrepreneur. Um, and makes them feel so wise and smart, right? Because they have the opportunity to share the knowledge that they've learned. Um, so it's not altruistic for them, like they get something out of it. Um, and you asking gives them the opportunity to feel that way. And so definitely reach out. Um, I would say that like if you want to turn that into a mentorship relationship, um, like there, I'm curious on other people's thoughts on this, but just off the top of my head, like this is where a lot of the touch points and the guidelines that we've just talked about, I think come into play. Where if you have a conversation and then you send a thank you note as a follow up, and then maybe you see an article that reminds them of something uh, that you think that they would find interesting, and you're working on your business or you're like going through your job search journey, and you reach out to say, hey, I just found this great job, wanted to thank you for helping me out on my journey, or hey, we just hit this milestone, uh thanks again for talking with me back in March. Then all of a sudden you've like built these touch points and you've built this relationship, and at a certain point, and I think it's totally subjective, like you will know when you have enough of a relationship with that person to say, hey, it's really been great getting to know you, and I've really appreciated your feedback. Would you be interested in like in being my mentor and being a more formal thing? Here's what I mean by that. Here would be my goals, and then I think that it spins off a conversation of you, but people have the bandwidth and the interest. But that's kind of how I would approach it.
Okay, and then like the follow up is like with should it be like email, so like more like email heavy, like, oh, here's like as you said, like I like the whole checkpoint of like, hey, I want to thank you, your advice. I followed up with that advice and implemented it and we hit this milestone. And then kind of shoot them an email. Or but also like should I schedule a call and ask for more advice? Because I know that like especially our session got cut short. I could like I guess in investor language, is it because I know like time is money, so it's like I don't want to ask for a meeting if it's not appropriate. But if they said, hey, feel free to ask for any help or anything, are they and one of them said call or email, so I guess a call would be good, but I just didn't know if there's a good way to like set up a call like that, like, oh, I just want some more additional feedback, like so I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's overstepping the boundary there?
Um, Investors are people too. You know, the like it worst comes to worst again, like they say no. And also are you the question that I think where I see most people uh, fall short is they ask for a call because they think that having a call is what they're supposed to do to build a relationship, but they haven't actually built the foundation of what goals they have for the call. And then that will feel like wasting somebody's time. Um, right. Um, if you're having a call and it's just because like you wanted to connect with them, but you don't actually have an agenda and you don't actually have something that you're trying to learn. And like people pick up on that and it's not a great look in my opinion. Um, but if you have reflected on why do I want to talk to this person in particular? What do I want to learn from them? Why do I think they're cool? What do I want to learn about myself that I think that this person can help me reflect on? Um, then to me, like that makes the conversation more authentic. And they either take the call or they don't. They're not gonna dock you points um, for asking.
Okay. Yeah, no, that helps. Thank you.
For sure. Anybody else have thoughts on Logan's question, or have another question?
I'm curious, specifically with the mentorship program through BFA. So I got a job recently and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate what that next step, or if there's a next step with my mentor. We touched base after I got the job and we just kind of were like, we'll figure it out later if there's something more. But I'm curious, when you mentioned there's that potential for something like a more continued mentorship, what would that look like in your mind? What are you asking from them?
Yeah. One, congrats. That's awesome. Um, and I wanna maybe I'll follow up with you because I'm really curious, like how that mentorship relationship was helpful in you finding a job. Um, to like the things that I think are interesting with a mentorship relationship is that it changes and you can't really foresee it. Um, you're going to be learning a ton, assuming Matt that you like came to VFA right after graduation and this is your first job, like you're going to be learning a ton, right? You're probably in the first 6 months, like maybe like they won't have anything for you to do and you'll have a lot more free time than you thought you would. And that was my experience when I started. Um, and I was like, how do I spend my time when nobody's telling me what to do and I don't know anything to do with it? Right. That's like one question. Um, so it'll change over time. Uh, I would say like some questions to think about are, do each of you have the bandwidth to do this in over a long term? Maybe the frequency changes. It might be, once a quarter rather than once a month for an hour, rather than 30 minutes. And the onus will be on you to like figure out what are the things that you're working through together, right? So for you to set the agenda to say, I am really struggling with XYZ. I had an experience that was that like I wasn't sure if I handled it correctly, that I'd really like your perspective on, like things like that. Um, and maybe you might say, hey, like honestly, things are going really well. I'm just kind of like going heads down and learning. But would love to catch up for 20 minutes and see how you're doing. Um, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I one additional question, that
Yeah.
less relevant to me now, but I'm curious, like when you were having these conversations when you were doing your job search, like the challenge I ran into is you don't go into the conversation asking for a job or asking for like point me to the directions of the job. How were you framing that conversation with these people when you were making those connections? Like what was your ask from them? Because I assume it wasn't like, hey, point me to the job, give me the job.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So I think like this is kind of what I was asking everybody, right? I was like, um, like what companies are you seeing in this space that you're excited about? Or like, I'd love to learn about like your journey, how you got to this space and what you're working on at XYZ company. Um, so it was, it can be pretty broad, but I think to Anand's question earlier, where like you might not know your question, it might be okay to say, hey, I'm really new to this industry, but I'm excited about it. I just want to learn about what you're working on. And the more conversations you have about that, you start to build like I'll use my language, like I personally started to build more context for what was going on in this world. And so whereas the first conversations were me asking like pretty simple questions, eventually I could ask maybe more thoughtful questions or questions that required more context. And so that when I did go into job interviews, I think that reflected also that like, I don't have any industry experience in this industry, but I've done my research and I've talked to people who are actually working in it, and I've built context about what's going on. So those were some of the questions that I asked. It's a great question.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think that that's a good place to cut it. But thanks so much for y'all for staying till the end, and thanks for everybody who I know had to leave at the time that we had set. And excited for everyone who's going to watch us in the future. Hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.